there you go. This is the land. The land. And this is where I doze, or have dozed today. Need to move on, but having listened to quite a good afternoon play. And this is the story of the land for 20, 30 years, longer. Yes, having listened to a good afternoon play. Estrangements, long ones. So I accidentally left on Woman's Hour. And one of the gussets, the way they all have to broadcast these days is that they're fizzing with being thrilled by new information or whatever. Yeah. New archaeological evidence has just found that ancient Egyptian women were very much part of the armies and would undergo intensive archery and spear throwing training, and then became formidable warriors. Yeah, and why the fuck not? But unfortunately, none of them mention the land. Now, okay, you have a lot of farming nowadays is done by a great big machine, but there are still loads of ordinary routine jobs that you have to do by hand, like putting gates in, building fences and all of that. And for 30 years, 25 years, 20 years, it is so kind of lonely and bleak and boring because basically none of the women help you. Sorry, that's not sexist. That's just a mere observation. And I shall leave this as a record on YouTube. Please let it be recorded. The day that women's hour... of course, there are all sorts of things that women deal with, the actual dealing with horses, so to speak. Anyway, yeah, that's the glamorous end. Yeah, the long, boring jobs, whichever. Okay, they give you satisfaction. There's very little as satisfying as spending 5 hours, if you're going to do it for a kind of residential property, maybe 10 hours. 10 hours would be a bit too much, but 5 to 7 hours doing a really good new gate, a couple of gate posts, probably concreted it in the main one, and rehanging your gate. It's really quite a fiddly job to get the holes just right if it's going to be a fancy version. Yeah, there's nothing more satisfying. I think I've got a bit of film on my material, about 3,000 video clips back. I need to sort them out. Where you just, really, especially if it's a really difficult place, up a mountain, which is where I've done most of my farm and land outbuilding part-time, but I like it. It's nice to work outdoors. But yeah, if you've got a bit of really stony, rocky ground, and you've had to sweat to dig the stones out, and there's no other way really of doing it than by hand. Nothing more satisfying. A couple of days later, once the concrete's set and you've spent an hour or two alone, which is much harder, just holding up your gate, propping it up with stones, just getting the level right, adjusting the hinges so it's like bang on level. There's very little that's as satisfying as that. But to get somebody to help you, join up, do these kinds of jobs together, and going back to when you're doing those kind of jobs, about 25% of the work is easier if there are two of you doing it, i.e. rehanging especially a 12-foot gate. They're pretty heavy. So yeah, let it be recorded that, and nobody speaks about this. Nobody will speak about it. I actually don't know why, because you see, I think there's a vicious circle involved in this. So it's like, as those of us, and I left the land, or rather, that makes it sound like I'm some kind of one of these pricks. There was one on this morning on the farming program, or no, it was the 6:30 in the morning one, making out that the land is some mythical, magical, it's almost like a superpower, being in tune with nature, which, I mean, I come for a sleep here for 20 years. It's like nothing better than a siesta here. But to keep to the point, it's like, yeah, I think there's a vicious circle, which is, if the men, I mean, if you read H.E. Bates, D.H. Lawrence, forget Virginia Woolf, she should have been thrown in a river. Is she the one who threw herself in a river? I can't remember. What you got, Sylvia Plath and Virginia, did they both do themselves in? I can't remember. They're both useless, sorry, and I prefer women writers. Anyway, you will find that the women were kind of mucking in, doing, yeah, go down the Cot Valley in Cornwall, and there's a statue, a little special engraving of a woman making her living cracking rocks. Um, but the vicious circle, you see, I think is those, especially those who work full time. I've deliberately only worked part time. I sort of returned to doing it, well, a bits and bobs 30 years ago, but then a little bit more kind of structured and for money as of 20 years ago. My ideal is to work about a third of the time outdoors on the land doing these jobs. But if you work full time, yeah, as of 20, 30 years ago, women just don't get involved at all anymore. It's almost like they've infantilized themselves. So men, not me, because I'm lucky. I raised a girl child, alone. And that changes you. But I think there is an element of the men who've got to go out day after day, year after year, and rebuild their fences, etc. I think they do have become a bit sour inside as to, well, why the fucking hell aren't the women helping doing these jobs? They're so. And of course, then that turns into a little bit of a vicious circle of men having less of a positive positive affirmations when it comes to women. And then, of course, that means that women are less likely to be outdoors working on the land some of the time. And in fact, it's actually really enjoyable to do it in kind of bad weather in the winter, because that's when you have such pleasure, when you've had a tough day outside and it's really cold or even sleeting. And then you come back in at the end of the day, and maybe you have a soak, and maybe you have a nice, warming meal, and it's just like, oh God, I earned that. Yeah, so it's like, so if they can fucking well, even 3,000 years ago, wearing stupid costumes, have bows and arrows and spears, and go around killing people, and be celebrated within the pottery or whatever they found for this, let somebody make pottery that refers to now, with the women not basic. I mean, and sorry, I lived for many years in very rural areas where if you're walking or even if you're driving, you notice who's doing that job, and you also notice how unhappy and hunched up and sour most of the farmers are. And then you get to know them, and then you hear the stories. Well, there hasn't been a woman in our farmhouse for 20 years since she fucked off to be closer to Harvey Nickers. And the energy goes. I mean, of course, men have a bit of a crack if they're together, but over time the energy goes bad. It's just I mean, big farm close to where I used to live. I met all three of the male inhabitants of that farmhouse over a long period of time. One of the sons had left and lived with a woman and had a nice family, and he was the happy one. But the other two, God, one of the sons, I felt so sorry for him. He was so sour, but he was lonely. He would just be for days and days quadding around, looking after his small flock, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think I've made my point. I need to commission some pottery. But how would this be done in art? Hmm. Well, I have met a potter who I think she might just be able to get it. Right, the end.